I'm Leah Jackson, 31 years old, and 6 months ago, my world completely shattered when my own brother chose his wife's family over his own sister during the most vulnerable moment of my life. The betrayal left me questioning everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. But what my mother did next was even worse. If you've ever been abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect you most, please let me know where you're watching from and subscribe to join others who understand this particular type of heartbreak. 10 years ago, I met Daniel at a coffee shop in downtown Portland on a rainy Tuesday morning in March. I was 21, fresh out of college with a marketing degree I wasn't sure how to use, nursing my third cup of coffee while scrolling through job listings on my laptop. The Wi-Fi kept cutting out, and I was getting increasingly frustrated when this tall guy with kind brown eyes approached my table. "Excuse me," he said, "but you look like you're about to throw that laptop through the window. Need help?" His smile was genuine, not condescending, and when he offered to share his mobile hotspot, something about his easy confidence put me at ease immediately. Daniel worked as a project manager for a sustainable building company, and we spent 2 hours talking about everything from renewable energy to our shared obsession with obscure documentaries. When he asked for my number, writing it down in an actual notebook instead of typing it into his phone, I knew he was different from anyone I'd dated before. Our relationship built slowly and deliberately, like the eco-friendly houses his company constructed. Daniel wasn't the type to rush into anything, which initially frustrated my impatient 21-year-old self, but I learned to appreciate his thoughtful approach to everything we did together. Our first real date was a hiking trip to Multnomah Falls, where he packed homemade trail mix and actually remembered that I'd mentioned being allergic to peanuts during our coffee shop conversation. By month 3, we had established routines that felt natural rather than forced. Saturday mornings meant farmers market visits, where Daniel would charm every vendor while I picked out ingredients for whatever elaborate dinner I'd decided to attempt. Sunday evenings were reserved for cooking together in his tiny apartment kitchen, often ending with flour in my hair and sauce splatters on his shirt as we laughed over our culinary disasters. He introduced me to his love of woodworking, teaching me to use his grandfather's tools in the garage workspace he'd converted behind his apartment building. I taught him to appreciate the art museums he'd always avoided, watching his face light up when he discovered abstract pieces that reminded him of architectural blueprints. We traveled together for the first time 8 months in, a long weekend camping trip to Crater Lake, where Daniel surprised me by bringing a telescope he'd borrowed from a coworker. Lying on our backs under the clearest sky I'd ever seen, pointing out constellations neither of us could properly identify, I felt a contentment I'd never experienced before. When I told him I loved him that night, with the Milky Way stretched above us like a promise, his response was to pull me closer and whisper, "I was wondering when you'd finally say it first." The next 5 years felt like we were building something solid and lasting, brick by brick. Daniel got promoted to senior project manager, then eventually started his own consulting firm, specializing in green building practices. I found my footing in digital marketing, working my way up from assistant to coordinator to eventually starting my own freelance practice, focusing on sustainable businesses. We moved in together after 18 months, choosing a small bungalow in the Alberta Arts District that needed work but had good bones, as Daniel put it. Weekends became projects, refinishing hardwood floors, painting accent walls, building raised garden beds in the backyard where we grew tomatoes and herbs that actually thrived under Daniel's patient care. Our daily rhythm felt effortless after all those years together. Daniel left for work sites at 7:30 each morning, kissing me goodbye while I was still in my pajamas, clutching my first cup of coffee. I worked from our converted spare bedroom, taking calls with clients while listening to the sound of Daniel's tools in the garage when he was home. Evenings meant cooking dinner together, usually something simple like pasta with vegetables from our garden, eaten at the small table Daniel had built from reclaimed wood. We'd watch Netflix while sharing a bowl of vanilla ice cream, debating plot points of whatever crime documentary we were currently obsessed with. Friday nights were sacred for trying new restaurants in the city, but Saturday mornings still belonged to the farmers market, where vendors now greeted us by name and saved the best produce for Daniel and his girl. We talked about marriage constantly, not as a distant concept, but as an inevitable next step we were both excited about. Daniel had started dropping hints about ring shopping, asking seemingly casual questions about my preferences for vintage versus modern settings. We'd picked out our ideal neighborhood for house hunting, spent Sunday afternoons driving through streets lined with craftsman homes, imagining which ones might become available. Our 5-year plan included a wedding within the next 18 months, buying a house with enough space for his workshop and my office, and starting a family before I turned 30. The security felt intoxicating after years of uncertainty in my early 20s. Daniel's steady presence had become the foundation everything else in my life was built on. When clients were difficult or projects fell through, coming home to his calm energy and terrible dad jokes could salvage any day. When I worried about my freelance business or questioned career decisions, his unwavering confidence in my abilities gave me strength to push forward. He celebrated every small victory like it was a major achievement, bringing home flowers when I landed new clients and cooking elaborate meals when I completed challenging projects. But looking back now, I think our life had become so comfortable that I'd stopped noticing subtle warning signs that should have concerned me. Daniel had always been close with his family, particularly his younger brother Marcus and his wife Jennifer, but lately their relationship felt more complicated. Marcus would call at odd hours, sometimes sounding stressed or upset, and Daniel would take these conversations privately in the garage or on walks around the neighborhood. When I asked about these calls, Daniel would brush off my questions with vague responses about family stuff, or Marcus being Marcus. Jennifer had always been polite but distant with me, which I'd attributed to personality differences, but recently her coolness felt more deliberate and pointed. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in October. Daniel left for a consultation meeting downtown, kissing me goodbye and promising to pick up ingredients for the butternut squash soup we'd planned for dinner. I settled into my office with coffee and my laptop, preparing for client calls scheduled throughout the day. The autumn light filtering through the windows felt warm and promising, and I remember feeling particularly optimistic about several potential projects in my pipeline. At 11:15, my phone rang with an unknown number, but the voice on the other end belonged to a nurse from Legacy Emmanuel Medical Center. The family dynamics in my life had always been complicated, marked by patterns I'd learned to navigate but never quite understood. My mother, Patricia, had raised my brother Marcus and me as a single parent after our father left when I was 8, and Marcus was 5. She'd worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, cleaning offices at night and working retail during the day, and I'd spent most of my childhood feeling responsible for taking care of Marcus while she was gone. This early caretaking role had shaped my personality in ways I was only beginning to understand in my 30s, creating an automatic impulse to fix problems and smooth over conflicts even when they weren't mine to solve. Marcus had always been my mother's favorite, though she would have denied this if confronted directly. She excused his behavior in ways she never did mine, whether it was poor grades in school, irresponsible spending habits, or his pattern of dating women who treated him poorly. When Marcus dropped out of college junior year to pursue a career in music that never materialized, my mother supported his decision and even helped him financially. When I'd struggled through my senior year, working part-time jobs to pay for textbooks and rent, she'd lectured me about being more responsible with money. The double standard had been clear for years, but I'd learned to accept it as part of our family's unspoken hierarchy. Marcus met Jennifer during one of his brief attempts at finishing his degree, and she'd immediately recognized the power dynamics in our family, aligning herself with my mother in ways that gradually pushed me further to the periphery. Jennifer came from money, the kind of old Portland family who owned property in the Pearl District and belonged to country clubs I'd only seen from the outside. She had definite opinions about appropriate behavior and social expectations, often making subtle comments about Daniel's blue-collar background or my decision to work freelance instead of pursuing a more stable corporate career. During family gatherings, I noticed how Jennifer and my mother would exchange looks when I shared news about my business or talked about plans Daniel and I were making for our future. The 3 specific moments that should have prepared me for what was coming had all occurred within the past year, but I'd rationalized each one away rather than acknowledge the troubling pattern they revealed. Last Christmas, when Daniel and I announced we were seriously looking at engagement rings, Jennifer had made a pointed comment about people who plan weddings before they can afford houses, despite knowing we'd been saving diligently for both. My mother had laughed and agreed, suggesting we focus on being more practical about our timeline. When I'd felt hurt by their response, both women had accused me of being too sensitive and needing to learn to take a joke. Last Christmas, in March when I'd landed my biggest client contract ever, worth more than I'd made in the previous 6 months combined, I'd called my mother excitedly to share the news. Instead of congratulating me, she'd immediately started questioning whether I was sure the company was legitimate and warning me about schemes that sound too good to be true. When the contract proved completely legitimate and successful, she never acknowledged her doubts or apologized for her lack of confidence in my judgment. Meanwhile, when Marcus started dating Jennifer, who worked an entry-level job at her family's real estate company, my mother had praised Jennifer's business acumen and professional sophistication. The third incident happened just 2 months ago, during Marcus and Jennifer's engagement party at an upscale restaurant in the Pearl District that Jennifer's parents had paid for. Daniel and I had dressed carefully for the occasion, with me wearing a vintage dress I'd found at a consignment shop, and Daniel in his best button-down shirt, and the blazer I'd bought him for his birthday. We'd brought a thoughtful gift, a beautiful cutting board Daniel had made from walnut wood with their initials engraved, and I'd written a heartfelt card expressing my excitement about welcoming Jennifer officially into our family. But throughout the evening, I felt increasingly like an outsider at my own brother's celebration. Jennifer's family and friends dominated the conversation, discussing people and places Daniel and I didn't know, while our contributions to conversations were met with polite but dismissive responses. When I tried to share a funny story about Marcus from our childhood, Jennifer interrupted to redirect attention to her own family anecdotes. When Daniel attempted to connect with Jennifer's father over their shared interest in construction and building, he was quickly shut down with condescending comments about the impressive complexity of real commercial development versus Daniel's small residential projects. My mother, rather than helping us feel included, seemed more interested in impressing Jennifer's parents, agreeing enthusiastically with their subtle put-downs and acting as though she barely knew Daniel, despite his 5 years as part of our family. The contrast with my chosen family couldn't have been more stark. My best friend Sarah, whom I'd met in college and who had become like a sister to me over the past decade, had always treated Daniel like family from our second date forward. She included him in group conversations, asked about his work with genuine interest, and made sure he felt welcome at every gathering. My friend group from work, other freelancers and small business owners I'd connected with through networking events, had embraced both Daniel and me as we built our life together. Even Daniel's family, despite being more reserved by nature, had made consistent efforts to include me in their traditions and had shown genuine interest in my work and goals. Daniel's parents, Linda and Robert, lived in a small town outside of Eugene, where Robert worked as a high school science teacher and Linda managed the local library. They weren't wealthy or sophisticated by Jennifer's family standards, but they possessed a warmth and authenticity that made every visit feel like coming home. Linda always made sure to ask about my current projects when we visited, remembering details about clients and challenges I'd mentioned months earlier. Robert had built me a custom desk for my office as a birthday gift, spending weeks crafting something perfectly suited to my needs and workspace. When Daniel and I had talked about our engagement timeline during our last visit, both parents had responded with enthusiasm and immediate offers to help however they could, whether that meant financial contributions or hands-on assistance with planning. The phone call that changed everything came at 11:15 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in October, delivered by a calm but serious voice that introduced herself as Nurse Williams from Legacy Emmanuel Medical Center. "Ms. Jackson, I'm calling about Daniel Martinez. He's been brought to our emergency department following a serious motorcycle accident. He's stable, but I need you to come to the hospital as soon as possible." The words seemed to come from very far away, and I found myself asking her to repeat information I couldn't seem to process. Daniel didn't even own a motorcycle. He'd been driving his pickup truck to a work meeting downtown. The details felt wrong, impossible, but the nurse's patient explanations gradually made the situation clear. Daniel had been traveling northbound on MLK Boulevard when a driver running a red light had T-boned his truck at the intersection near Lloyd Center. The impact had been severe enough to crush the driver's side of his vehicle and trap him inside for nearly 20 minutes while emergency crews worked to extract him. He was conscious, but had suffered multiple injuries, including a broken leg, possible internal bleeding, and a concussion that had left him confused and disoriented. The nurse assured me he was receiving excellent care, but emphasized that they needed his emergency contact information updated and someone present to help make medical decisions if necessary. I grabbed my keys and purse with shaking hands, realizing I'd been unconsciously holding my breath since the phone call began. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of stopped traffic and construction zones that seemed determined to prevent me from reaching Daniel quickly. I called my mother while stuck at a red light, needing to hear a familiar voice and share the frightening news with family. "Mom, Daniel's been in a serious accident," I said when she answered. "I'm driving to the hospital now. He's hurt badly. Broken bones, possible internal bleeding. I'm scared, and I could really use some support right now." My mother's response should have prepared me for everything that followed, but shock and worry made me miss the significance of her reaction in the moment. "Oh, honey, that's terrible," she said, but her tone sounded distracted rather than concerned. "I'm actually at Jennifer's bridal shower planning meeting right now. Can you call me back later with an update?" I could hear voices and laughter in the background, the clink of glasses and the rustle of papers. "Mom, I said he might have internal bleeding," I repeated, certain she hadn't understood the severity of the situation. "This is really serious. I don't know how bad it is yet." Her response was to sigh audibly and say, "Lotta, I'm sure he'll be fine. You know how hospitals exaggerate everything. Call me tonight when you know more, okay?" The phone call ended with me staring at my cell phone in disbelief, sitting in hospital parking garage while trying to process what had just happened. My boyfriend of 5 years was lying injured and possibly fighting for his life upstairs, and my mother was more concerned about bridal shower planning than offering support during the most frightening experience of my adult life. I sat in my car for several minutes, trying to convince myself that she simply hadn't understood how serious the situation was, that her distracted response was just unfortunate timing rather than a reflection of her priorities. 3 days later, I experienced what I can only describe as emotional whiplash, when my family's response to Daniel's condition became impossible to rationalize away. Daniel had been moved from the ICU to a regular room, but his recovery was going to be lengthy and complicated. The internal bleeding had required surgery, his leg was broken in multiple places, and the concussion had left him with headaches and memory issues that doctors said could persist for weeks or months. I'd been sleeping in the hospital chair beside his bed, leaving only to shower and change clothes at home before returning immediately. Sarah had brought me meals every day, sitting with Daniel when I needed to handle insurance calls or meet with doctors. My coworkers had sent flowers and offered to help with any urgent client needs. Daniel's parents had driven up from Eugene immediately upon hearing the news, bringing homemade soup and staying in a nearby hotel so they could visit during every allowed hour. Even acquaintances from our neighborhood had stopped by with cards and offers to help with anything we needed. The outpouring of support from our chosen family had been overwhelming and beautiful, making the silence from my blood relatives even more glaring. I'd called my mother twice more since the initial conversation, leaving detailed voicemails about Daniel's condition and my own emotional state, but hadn't received any response. Marcus hadn't called or texted at all, despite my sending him updates about his future brother-in-law's condition. When I'd tried calling him directly, the call went straight to voicemail. I'd begun to wonder if something was wrong with my phone or if some family emergency I wasn't aware of was preventing them from responding to my crisis. On Thursday evening, as I was helping Daniel eat dinner and trying to keep his spirits up despite his obvious pain and frustration, my mother finally called back. "Hi, honey," she said cheerfully. "Sorry I haven't called back. It's been such a busy week with all the wedding planning. Jennifer found the most amazing florist, and we've been running around looking at venues and trying on dresses. How's Daniel doing?" Her tone suggested she was asking about a minor illness rather than life-threatening injuries. And the casual mention of wedding planning activities while I'd been living in a hospital felt like a slap across the face. "Mom, I've been here for 3 days straight," I said, trying to keep my voice steady so I wouldn't upset Daniel, who was watching my face with concern despite his own pain. He had emergency surgery for internal bleeding. He's going to need months of physical therapy, and we don't know yet if there will be permanent effects from the head injury. I've been terrified and exhausted, and I really needed my family's support. The silence on her end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had been dropped. When she finally responded, her words hit me like another collision. "Leah, you're being dramatic. These things happen, and you just have to deal with them. Jennifer and Marcus are getting married in 2 months, and there are important things that need attention right now." The conversation that followed revealed priorities and attitudes I'd never seen stated so clearly, though I realized they'd been evident in smaller ways for years. My mother explained that she'd been incredibly busy helping with wedding preparations, as though this somehow justified her absence during a legitimate family emergency. She reminded me that Marcus and Jennifer had been planning this wedding for over a year, as though that planning trumped the immediate crisis Daniel and I were facing. When I pressed her about why she couldn't spare even a brief hospital visit or phone call to check on us, she accused me of being selfish and expecting too much attention. "Was så bajsen and it broken Friday spelning bub my boy Ronaldens. Daniel will recover, and then everything will go back to normal. But Marcus only gets married once, and Jennifer's family is going to judge us based on how involved and supportive we are during this time. I need you to understand that some things are more important than your need for constant attention and reassurance." The accusation of attention-seeking felt particularly cruel given that I'd been handling the entire crisis alone, dealing with doctors and insurance companies and emotional trauma without asking for anything more than basic family support. When I hung up the phone that night, Daniel reached for my hand despite the IV tubes and bandages covering his arms. "What did she say?" he asked gently. I found myself unable to repeat her words exactly, instead summarizing with the face-saving explanation that she was busy with wedding stuff and would try to visit soon. But Daniel's eyes told me he'd heard enough of the conversation to understand what had really happened, and his expression of angry disappointment on my behalf made me realize that my family's behavior wasn't normal or acceptable, regardless of how I'd learned to tolerate it over the years. 1 week after the accident, I received a call from Marcus that initially made me hopeful that my family was finally going to step up and provide the support Daniel and I desperately needed. "Hey sis," he said, using the childhood nickname that usually meant he wanted something from me. "I heard about Daniel's accident. That really sucks." His tone was casual, almost bored, as though he was discussing a minor inconvenience rather than a traumatic event that had upended our lives. When I started to explain the extent of Daniel's injuries and the challenges we were facing, Marcus interrupted quickly. "Listen, Leah, I'm actually calling about something important," he said, and I could hear Jennifer's voice in the background, apparently coaching him through the conversation. "Jennifer and I need to talk to you about the wedding. There have been some changes to the guest list, and we need to discuss how your situation affects the plans we've made." The phrase "your situation" hit me like a physical blow, as though Daniel's accident was some kind of personal choice I'd made, rather than a tragedy that had happened to us. Marcus went on to explain that Jennifer's family had offered to pay for upgraded catering and an open bar, but only if the guest list could be reduced to make room for additional family members from her side. The conversation that followed revealed a level of callousness I hadn't believed my brother was capable of. "We've decided that it doesn't make sense for Daniel to come to the wedding anymore," Marcus said matter-of-factly. "I mean, he's going to be in a wheelchair or on crutches, right? Jennifer's really worried about the photos, and her photographer said that mobility equipment would be distracting in the formal shots." I sat in stunned silence as my brother continued outlining the practical reasons why Daniel's presence at their wedding had become inconvenient. The venue had stairs that would be difficult to navigate with mobility equipment. The reception included dancing that Daniel obviously wouldn't be able to participate in. Jennifer's grandmother, who was elderly and easily upset, might be disturbed by seeing someone who was visibly injured. Each reason felt more heartless than the last, but Marcus delivered them as though they were reasonable accommodations rather than cruel exclusions. "Plus," Marcus added, and I could hear Jennifer's voice more clearly now, apparently prompting him to include additional points. "Jennifer thinks it might be better if you came alone anyway. She's worried that if Daniel is there, everyone will be focused on talking about the accident instead of celebrating our special day." You understand, right? This is supposed to be the happiest day of our lives, and we can't have anything bringing down the mood or making it about someone else's problems. The final insult came when Marcus suggested that I should be grateful for their consideration in still including me, given that my situation had become so complicated and demanding. He explained that several family members had expressed concerns about my emotional state and ability to participate fully in wedding festivities while dealing with Daniel's recovery. Jennifer's family, according to Marcus, had specifically requested that the wedding party and immediate family members be people who could focus completely on celebrating rather than being distracted by outside problems. I hung up on my brother for the first time in my adult life, but not before telling him exactly what I thought of his priorities and his wife-to-be's values. The phone call left me shaking with an anger I'd never experienced before, a rage that felt both protective and empowering. When I explained the conversation to Daniel, still downplaying the cruelest parts, his response was immediate and clear. "Leia, that's not okay. That's not even close to okay. Your family is supposed to show up for you when things get hard, not disappear when you need them most." 2 weeks later, as Daniel began the slow process of physical therapy, and I struggled to manage both his care and my work responsibilities, I received an invitation in the mail that felt like the final insult in a series of increasingly painful family betrayals. The envelope was addressed only to me, with no mention of Daniel's name, and inside was a formal wedding invitation with a handwritten note from Jennifer that read, "Leia, we're so excited to celebrate with you. As discussed, this invitation is for you only. We hope you understand that we're keeping the celebration intimate and focused on joy. Can't wait to see you there. XOXO, Jennifer and Marcus." The invitation itself was elegant and expensive, printed on heavy cardstock with gold foil lettering, clearly costing more per piece than I typically spent on groceries for a week. Jennifer had included additional cards with information about the bridal shower, bachelorette parties, and rehearsal dinner, all events I was apparently expected to attend, despite my family's complete absence during our recent crisis. A separate card detailed gift registry information from high-end stores, with suggested contributions ranging from $150 to $500 for individual items. Reading through the wedding materials while sitting beside Daniel's hospital bed, watching him struggle through painful physical therapy exercises, the disconnect between my family's expectations and their behavior felt surreal. They wanted me to celebrate their happiness while showing no concern for my own suffering. They expected me to participate in multiple pre-wedding events while offering no support during the most difficult period of my adult life. They were comfortable excluding Daniel, who'd been part of our family for 5 years, because his injuries might inconvenience their perfect day. Oldie that evening, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I called my mother and asked her to meet me for coffee the next day, explaining that I needed to have a serious conversation about the wedding and our family dynamics. Her response was immediately defensive, as though she sensed that I was finally going to challenge the patterns we'd all learned to accept. "Leah, I hope you're not going to cause drama about the wedding," she said. "Jennifer's family has been so generous, and this is supposed to be a happy time. I need you to be mature about this." The next afternoon, I sat across from my mother at a coffee shop in Southeast Portland, choosing a public location because I wanted witnesses to whatever conversation was about to unfold. I'd prepared carefully for this meeting, writing down key points I wanted to address, and practicing staying calm despite my anger. My mother arrived 20 minutes late, carrying shopping bags from expensive stores, and complaining immediately about traffic and parking difficulties. Her casual lateness and obvious prioritization of shopping over our scheduled conversation felt symbolic of everything wrong with our relationship. "Mom," I began, "I need you to understand how hurt and abandoned I've felt by the family's response to Daniel's accident and recovery." I'd intended to start gently, but her immediate eye roll and exaggerated sigh made it clear that a gentle approach wouldn't be effective. "Your son-in-law-to-be was nearly killed, and none of you have visited the hospital, sent flowers, called to check on his recovery, or offered any support whatsoever. Instead, you've all been focused entirely on wedding planning, as though nothing important happened." My mother's response revealed attitudes and beliefs I'd never heard stated so explicitly, though I realized they'd been shaping our family dynamics for years. "Leah, you're 28 years old," she said, her voice taking on the lecturing tone I remembered from childhood. "You're not married to Daniel, so technically he's not really family yet. Marcus is my actual son, and Jennifer is going to be my actual daughter-in-law. They have a right to expect that their wedding will be the priority right now, not your boyfriend's accident." The conversation escalated quickly as I challenged her definitions of family and loyalty, pointing out that Daniel had been more present and supportive in our family than Marcus had been in recent years. I reminded her of specific instances when Daniel had helped with household repairs, attended family gatherings, and shown genuine interest in her life and well-being. I contrasted his behavior with Marcus's pattern of appearing only when he needed money or favors, and his general disengagement from family relationships unless they served his immediate needs. "That's different," my mother insisted. "Marcus is blood family. He doesn't have to earn his place or prove himself the way other people do. And Jennifer comes from a good family with resources and connections that will benefit all of us. You need to think about the bigger picture instead of being selfish about your own temporary problems." The phrase temporary problems to describe Daniel's potentially life-altering injuries felt like another slap, but it also clarified something important about how my mother viewed our entire relationship. When I pressed her about what she meant by Jennifer's family's resources and connections, my mother became more explicit about calculations I'd suspected but never heard stated directly. Jennifer's family owned several successful businesses and had social connections that could benefit Marcus's career prospects. They'd already offered Marcus a position in their real estate development company with opportunities for advancement that could set him up financially for life. Jennifer's father had connections in city planning and development that could be valuable for anyone in construction or property management. "You and Daniel are nice people," my mother said, "but you're not going anywhere financially. You're freelancers with no real stability or growth potential. Jennifer's family can help Marcus build something substantial, something that lasts. As his family, we need to prioritize relationships that benefit everyone's long-term interests." The cold calculation in her voice was more hurtful than outright anger would have been, reducing my 5-year relationship to a series of financial assessments and social advantages. The final blow came when my mother explained the real reason for the family's wedding demands. Jennifer's family had been asking questions about Marcus's background and family situation, apparently conducting their own assessment of whether he was suitable husband material for their daughter. My mother and Marcus had been working to present our family as stable and supportive rather than acknowledging any problems or complications that might reflect poorly on Marcus's character or reliability. "Your situation with Daniel has become a problem," my mother said bluntly. Jennifer's parents are already concerned about Marcus's lack of steady career history and his college dropout status. Having a family member dealing with a serious crisis, especially one involving medical bills and long-term care needs, makes our whole family look unstable and potentially burdensome. Jennifer needs to be able to tell her parents that her new family is an asset, not a liability. I sat in stunned silence as my mother continued explaining how my relationship and current crisis had become obstacles to my brother's social advancement. Apparently, Jennifer's family had expressed concerns about absorbing a family with ongoing medical and financial challenges. They wanted assurance that Marcus's relatives wouldn't become dependent on their resources or create complications in their social circles. My mother and Marcus had decided that minimizing my presence and problems was the best strategy for ensuring the marriage proceeded smoothly. "So you want me to pretend Daniel doesn't exist and act like our crisis never happened? Also, Marcus can marry into money?" I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Other coffee shop patrons were beginning to notice our conversation, but I found myself beyond caring about public scenes. "You want me to smile and celebrate while my partner recovers from life-threatening injuries because his suffering is inconvenient for Jennifer's family's image of us?" My mother's response was to accuse me of being dramatic and selfish, repeating the same themes I'd been hearing my entire life whenever I'd challenged family decisions or demanded equal treatment. She reminded me that Marcus had always been the responsible one and that his success reflected well on the entire family. She suggested that I was jealous of his opportunities and trying to sabotage his happiness because my own life hadn't worked out as well as his. Each accusation felt designed to make me doubt my own perceptions and accept the family's treatment as somehow deserved. The conversation ended with my mother issuing what amounted to an ultimatum disguised as motherly advice. I could choose to support Marcus's wedding and maintain my place in the family by attending alone and focusing entirely on celebration, or I could continue causing drama and find myself increasingly excluded from family events and relationships. "Jennifer's family is going to be part of our lives forever," she said. "You need to decide whether you want to be part of that future, or whether you're going to keep making everything about yourself and your problems." That evening, I sat beside Daniel's hospital bed and told him everything that had been said during my conversation with my mother. I'd been shielding him from the worst of my family's behavior, trying to protect him from additional stress during his recovery, but hiding the truth had become more harmful than sharing it. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious and angry as I detailed each cruel dismissal and calculated manipulation. "Leah," he said when I finished, "you know this isn't normal, right? You know that families are supposed to rally around each other during emergencies, not abandon each other for social advantages." His question made me realize that years of conditioning had made me normalize treatment that any outside observer would recognize as emotionally abusive and manipulative. Sarah had been telling me for months that my family's dynamics were unhealthy, but I'd always defended them or made excuses rather than acknowledging the painful truth. "I think you need to decide what kind of family you want to build," Daniel continued gently, "because the family you were born into isn't functioning like a family should. They're functioning like a business, where relationships are investments and people are assets or liabilities. That's not love, Leah. That's not even basic human decency." His words hit me with the force of recognition, crystallizing insights I'd been avoiding for years. 3 days later, I received a phone call from Marcus that would prove to be the final straw in a series of increasingly outrageous family demands. He was calling to inform me that Jennifer had decided to move forward with planning a special baptism ceremony for their future children, to be held immediately after their wedding ceremony as part of the same celebration weekend. The event would include Jennifer's family's church community and several important business associates, making it a significant social occasion that required careful planning and perfect execution. "We dit samen toe, de verder fortets en intelligence hoer en fart with base dol affarding the evenwade samai." The thing is, Marcus said, his voice taking on the wheedling tone he'd used as a child when asking for favors, "Jennifer really wants this baptism thing to be perfect, and she's worried about having people there who might be dealing with personal problems or drama. She thinks it would be better if you didn't attend that part of the weekend, just to keep things focused and positive." The request was presented as though it were reasonable and considerate, rather than a deliberate exclusion designed to remove any potential complications from their perfect celebration. I found myself laughing, not from humor, but from the absurdity of being uninvited from a hypothetical baptism for children who didn't yet exist, by a woman who'd never shown any interest in having a real relationship with me. "Marcus," I said, "let me make sure I understand this correctly. Jennifer wants to uninvite me from a ceremony for children you don't have yet, because my boyfriend's car accident might somehow contaminate your wedding weekend?" The pause that followed suggested he was realizing how his request sounded when stated plainly. "Look, Leah, I know it seems weird," Marcus said, "but Jennifer's family has really strong opinions about these things. Her grandmother is super religious and traditional, and Jennifer thinks having someone there who's going through relationship problems or medical issues might bring bad energy to the blessing ceremony. It's supposed to be about new beginnings and positive futures, not about current problems and complications." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Marcus attempting to justify increasingly ridiculous demands while I pressed him to acknowledge the cruelty and manipulation involved in his family's behavior. Jennifer apparently wanted assurance that I wouldn't mention Daniel's accident or recovery during any part of the wedding weekend, because it might bring down the mood or distract from their celebration. She'd specifically requested that I not bring a +1 to any wedding-related events, not just because Daniel was recovering, but because my single status would better fit the family dynamic she was trying to create. "Jennifer has this vision of the perfect family celebration," Marcus explained, "and she's been planning this for over a year. She wants everything to be beautiful and joyful and Instagram perfect, without any reminders of problems or difficulties. She thinks you being there alone will be better for everyone, because then we can all focus on celebrating instead of dealing with medical updates or relationship complications." The final insult came when Marcus informed me that Jennifer had already spoken to my mother about managing my emotional state during the wedding weekend to ensure I didn't create any scenes or draw attention away from the bride and groom. They'd apparently discussed strategies for keeping me positive and supportive rather than allowing me to express any of the hurt or anger I'd been experiencing. My own mother had agreed to monitor my behavior and intervene if I seemed likely to cause any disruption to Jennifer's perfect celebration. "Jennifer just wants to make sure that her special day isn't overshadowed by other people's problems," Marcus said, apparently oblivious to how insulting his words were. "She's been dreaming about this wedding her whole life, and she deserves to have everything be exactly the way she's always imagined. You understand that, right? You want Marcus to be happy, and Jennifer makes him happy, so we all need to do whatever it takes to make this wedding perfect for them." I hung up the phone and immediately called Sarah, needing to share the conversation with someone who would confirm that I wasn't overreacting or misunderstanding the situation. Sarah listened to my recap with increasing disbelief and anger, ultimately declaring that my family's behavior had crossed every line of basic human decency. "Leah," she said, "they're literally asking you to pretend that the most traumatic experience of your adult life never happened, so that a woman who has never shown you kindness can have her picture-perfect wedding fantasy. That's not family, that's emotional abuse." The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't experienced in weeks. Daniel was improving daily, His physical therapy was progressing well, and his doctors were optimistic about his long-term recovery prospects. Our chosen family of friends and colleagues had rallied around us with support that had made the crisis manageable and even strengthened our relationship. The contrast between their genuine care and my blood family's calculated cruelty had become impossible to ignore or rationalize away. I spent the day drafting careful emails to Marcus, my mother, and Jennifer, explaining that I wouldn't be attending any part of their wedding weekend and that I needed space from family relationships that had proven to be conditional and manipulative. I outlined specific examples of their behavior during Daniel's crisis, contrasted it with the support we'd received from friends, and made clear that their treatment had damaged our relationships in ways that couldn't be easily repaired. The email to Jennifer was particularly cathartic to write, as I'd never been able to address her behavior directly without family pressure to keep the peace and avoid conflict. I thanked her for clarifying her priorities and values through her recent demands, noted that her vision of family apparently didn't include space for vulnerability or mutual support, and wished her well in building the superficial relationships she seemed to prefer. 2 days later, my phone began ringing constantly with increasingly frantic calls from family members who'd received forwarded copies of my emails. My mother left multiple voicemails accusing me of ruining Marcus's wedding and destroying family relationships over minor misunderstandings and temporary difficulties. Marcus sent angry text messages calling me selfish and dramatic, threatening that I'd regret choosing Daniel over family loyalty. Jennifer, surprisingly, remained silent, apparently confident that the rest of the family would pressure me back into compliance. The turning point came when my great-aunt Helen, my mother's sister who lived in Seattle and had always been the family's voice of reason, called to ask what had really happened during the past month. I'd always admired Aunt Helen's directness and integrity, but had assumed she was staying out of the family drama rather than taking sides. Her call revealed that she'd been watching the situation unfold with increasing concern and had finally decided to intervene when she'd heard about my decision not to attend the wedding. Lassa, lees pergis o lassa mais prime, but is amtid sherd coint my virtuot maus. Should there no inchum be even fro, umaravel pamayev, men beking stabilba mellage, amid it being the levels perbitalud paperiv, but here wanted to meet the amame and chalinens, but I've had gekum a without maima, jay past and spitter buddle, and meet him why me to made it non, did ship up get lay bullet, in Hartsenal, if it'll bob brisfignet femit. I spent over an hour detailing everything that had occurred since Daniel's accident, including conversations and demands I'd been too embarrassed to share with anyone outside our immediate circle. Aunt Helen's response was immediate and unequivocal. Honey, your family has been treating you terribly, and you're absolutely right to protect yourself and Daniel from this kind of behavior. What you're describing isn't normal family conflict. It's emotional manipulation designed to make you accept treatment that no one should have to tolerate. Her validation felt like a lifeline after weeks of being told I was overreacting or misunderstanding situations that had felt clearly wrong to me. The conversation with Aunt Helen led to a broader discussion about family patterns I'd never examined critically, including the favoritism that had shaped my childhood and the conditional love that had always made my place in the family feel precarious and earned rather than inherent. She shared observations about my mother's behavior that helped me understand how years of small dismissals and double standards had prepared me to accept the recent cruelty as somehow normal or deserved. Your mother has always had different expectations for you and Marcus. Aunt Helen said gently, she's expected you to be responsible and self-sufficient while making excuses for his behavior and failures. She's treated your successes as expected while celebrating his mediocrity as achievements. Now she's asking you to sacrifice your dignity and your partner's well-being so Marcus can marry into money and status. That's not love, Leah. That's use. The week before Marcus and Jennifer's wedding, I received an unexpected phone call from Jennifer's older sister, Melissa, whom I'd met only briefly during engagement party introductions. Her call was awkward and clearly uncomfortable, but also revealed cracks in the perfect facade Jennifer had been maintaining with her own family. Melissa had apparently heard enough details about the family dynamics to feel concerned about her sister's treatment of Daniel and me. Leah, I don't know you well, but I wanted to call because I think you should know that not everyone in Jennifer's family agrees with how this situation has been handled, Melissa said carefully. Some of us think the wedding demands have been unreasonable and cruel, especially regarding your boyfriend's accident. Jennifer has been telling people that your family drama was threatening to overshadow her wedding, but when I heard the actual details, it didn't sound like drama at all. It sounded like a medical emergency that your family ignored. Melissa's call revealed that Jennifer had been presenting a carefully edited version of events to her own family, portraying me as an attention-seeking family member who was trying to make the wedding about my personal problems rather than celebrating the bride and groom. She'd apparently told her family that I was demanding special accommodations for Daniel's recovery and insisting that wedding plans be altered to accommodate our situation. The reality that I'd simply hoped for basic family support during a crisis had been completely misrepresented. I wanted you to know that Jennifer's behavior doesn't represent how our family actually feels about inclusion and support during difficult times, Melissa continued. My parents are actually pretty uncomfortable with some of the things Jennifer has said about your family, especially about excluding people because of medical issues or financial concerns. That's not how we were raised, and it's not what we believe about family loyalty. The conversation with Melissa gave me perspective on how manipulation and image management had shaped not just my family's behavior, but Jennifer's presentation of the situation to her own relatives. She'd created a narrative that painted her as the reasonable party dealing with difficult family members, rather than acknowledging her role in escalating conflicts and making cruel demands. The revelation that even her own family had concerns about her behavior validated my growing conviction that the problem wasn't my sensitivity or expectations, but genuine cruelty disguised as wedding planning. On the morning of Marcus and Jennifer's wedding, I woke up feeling lighter and more peaceful than I had in months. Daniel and I spent the day on simple, restorative activities, making breakfast together in our kitchen, reading books in the backyard garden, taking a slow walk around our neighborhood while he practiced using his cane on uneven sidewalks. The contrast with the stress and performance I would have experienced at the wedding felt profound and healing. Sarah stopped by in the afternoon with flowers and takeout from our favorite restaurant, turning our quiet day into an impromptu celebration of the family we'd chosen rather than the family that had rejected us. Daniel's parents called to check on his recovery and to express their continued disapproval of my family's treatment of both of us. My coworkers and freelance colleagues had been sending supportive messages throughout the week, making it clear that our chosen community valued authenticity and mutual support over social performance and conditional loyalty. That evening, while Marcus and Jennifer were presumably celebrating their perfect wedding with their carefully curated guest list, Daniel and I sat on our front porch discussing the future we wanted to build together. His recovery was progressing well enough that we could begin making concrete plans again, setting a timeline for our own engagement, talking seriously about house hunting in the spring, imagining the kind of wedding celebration that would reflect our values rather than social expectations. "You know what I realized today?" Daniel said, reaching for my hand as we watched the sunset from our porch steps. "We already have everything your family was pretending to offer. We have loyalty that doesn't depend on convenience. We have support that shows up during emergencies. We have love that doesn't come with conditions or calculations. The only thing we lost was the illusion that your birth family could provide those things too." Those words crystallized something I'd been struggling to articulate throughout the past months. The grief I'd been experiencing wasn't really about losing my family. It was about finally accepting that I'd never had the family I'd thought I had. The relationships I'd been fighting to preserve had always been conditional and manipulative, requiring me to minimize myself and my needs in order to maintain connection. Letting go of those relationships meant accepting reality rather than losing something genuine. 3 months after the wedding, I received a letter from my mother that revealed how the family dynamics had evolved in my absence and confirmed that my decision to step away had been necessary for my own well-being. The letter was ostensibly an attempt at reconciliation, but reading between the lines revealed continued manipulation and blame shifting rather than genuine accountability or change. "Leah," the letter began, "I hope you've had time to think about your decisions and are ready to repair the damage that's been done to our family relationships. Marcus and Jennifer had a beautiful wedding, and it's unfortunate that you chose to miss such an important family milestone because of temporary relationship problems. Jennifer has been very hurt by your accusations and emails, and she's been trying to be understanding about your emotional state during a difficult time." The letter continued with carefully worded suggestions that I'd misunderstood family concerns and overreacted to wedding planning stress, rather than acknowledging the legitimate grievances I'd raised about their treatment of Daniel and me during our crisis. My mother described Jennifer as trying to include everyone while managing complicated family dynamics, rather than admitting that Jennifer had made cruel and exclusionary demands. Marcus was portrayed as caught in the middle between his wife and sister, rather than taking responsibility for his own choices and priorities. "Jennifer's family has been asking questions about why you weren't at the wedding," my mother wrote, "and it's been difficult to explain your absence without making our family look dysfunctional or unstable. Jennifer has been telling people that you were dealing with personal problems and couldn't attend, which has been kind and discreet considering how you've been behaving. But her family is starting to ask more specific questions, and we need to present a united front about family loyalty and support." The letter's conclusion revealed that even months later, my family's primary concern remained image management and social positioning rather than genuine relationship repair or acknowledgement of harmful behavior. My mother suggested that I write a letter of apology to Jennifer for misunderstanding her intentions and causing stress during her special time, and that I arrange to meet with both Jennifer and Marcus to clear the air and move forward as a family. "Marcus has been successful in his new position with Jennifer's family business," my mother added, "and there are opportunities for advancement that depend on family stability and harmony. Jennifer's parents need to feel confident that their daughter has married into a reliable, supportive family. Your continued absence and hostility are creating complications that affect everyone's future prospects. I need you to think about what's best for the whole family, not just your own hurt feelings. Reading my mother's letter while sitting in the home Daniel and I had built together, surrounded by photos of friends who'd become our chosen family, and evidence of the life we'd created based on mutual respect and genuine support, I felt grateful rather than hurt by her continued manipulation attempts. The letter had clarified that nothing fundamental had changed in my family's values or priorities, and that any reconciliation would require me to accept blame for their treatment of me, while pretending their behavior had been acceptable. I showed the letter to Daniel, whose response was immediate and clear. "Leia, they're still trying to make you responsible for managing their image and emotions instead of taking responsibility for their own behavior. That's exactly the same pattern that caused all this pain in the first place. You can't fix people who don't think they're broken." His perspective helped me see my mother's reconciliation attempt as confirmation that I'd made the right choice in establishing boundaries, rather than evidence that I should reconsider my position. 6 months after the wedding, I experienced an unexpected test of my new boundaries when Marcus called to inform me that he and Jennifer were expecting their first child and wanted to invite me to be part of the pregnancy journey and eventual baptism ceremony. His tone was cheerful and casual, as though the months of silence and conflict had never happened, and he seemed genuinely surprised when I didn't immediately express excitement about becoming an aunt. "Jennifer's been thinking about the baby's baptism," Marcus said, "and she wants to make sure the whole family is involved this time. She realizes that maybe some of the wedding planning got a little intense, and she wants to start fresh with the baby stuff. She's hoping you and Daniel can be part of the celebration and maybe help with some of the planning." The offer was presented as a generous gesture rather than an opportunity to test whether I'd learned to accept their treatment. I listened to Marcus describe Jennifer's pregnancy and their plans for an elaborate baptism ceremony that would serve as both a religious milestone and a social networking opportunity with Jennifer's family's business associates. The event was being planned as a multi-day celebration with out-of-town guests, professional photography, and catering that would cost more than Daniel and I spent on rent for several months. Jennifer apparently wanted me to help coordinate family involvement and contribute both financially and practically to making the celebration perfect. The thing is, Marcus continued, Jennifer's parents are really excited about being grandparents, and they want this baptism to be special for everyone. They've offered to help pay for the celebration, but they want to make sure that all the family members who participate are really committed to supporting Jennifer and the baby long term. They don't want any drama or family conflict to affect their grandchild's important day. I found myself smiling as Marcus outlined Jennifer's terms for my inclusion in their child's life, recognizing the same patterns of conditional acceptance and performative loyalty that had characterized their wedding demands. Jennifer apparently wanted assurance that I would be a positive influence on their child, which seemed to mean avoiding any mention of relationship difficulties, financial struggles, or family conflicts that might interfere with the image of perfect family harmony she wanted to maintain. Jennifer has been reading about how family dynamics affect children's development, Marcus said, and she wants to make sure that her kid only has relationships with family members who are stable and supportive. She thinks it would be confusing for a child to be around relatives who are dealing with ongoing problems or who might criticize family decisions. She wants everyone to focus on positivity and celebration rather than bringing up past conflicts or current difficulties. The conversation ended with Marcus asking me to meet with him and Jennifer to discuss their expectations for my role in their child's life and to address any lingering issues from the wedding period that might interfere with family unity going forward. He suggested that parenthood had given them new perspective on the importance of family harmony and that they were willing to move past previous conflicts if I was ready to commit to being a supportive family member without creating additional stress or complications. After hanging up with Marcus, I realized that his call had been less about genuine reconciliation than about testing whether months of boundary setting had made me more compliant and willing to accept their terms for conditional inclusion. The offer to be part of their child's life came with the same demands for image management and emotional suppression that had characterized their wedding planning, making it clear that nothing fundamental had changed in their approach to family relationships. That evening, Daniel and I talked extensively about how to respond to Marcus's invitation and whether there was any possibility of building healthy relationships with family members who seemed incapable of accepting responsibility for their harmful behavior or changing their manipulative patterns. We considered whether the arrival of a new generation might create opportunities for fresh starts and improved dynamics, or whether involving ourselves in Jennifer's family system would simply expose us to continued emotional manipulation and conditional acceptance. "I think the real question," Daniel said thoughtfully, "is whether you believe they're capable of treating you with respect and genuine care, or whether you'd always be walking on eggshells trying to avoid triggering their disapproval. A child deserves to have relationships with family members who model healthy boundaries and authentic communication, not people who teach them that love comes with conditions and calculations." Over the following weeks, I consulted with Sarah, Aunt Helen, and several other trusted friends about how to navigate the opportunity to be part of my future nephew or niece's life while protecting myself from continued family dysfunction. The consensus was clear. Any relationship with Marcus and Jennifer's child would need to be built on genuine respect and mutual accountability rather than my acceptance of their dysfunctional patterns and unreasonable demands. After careful consideration, I sent Marcus and Jennifer a letter explaining that I was open to building a relationship with their child, but only within the context of family dynamics that included mutual respect, genuine accountability for past behavior, and realistic expectations for how healthy families function during both celebrations and crises. I outlined specific changes that would need to occur in our relationships before I could feel comfortable being part of their child's life, including acknowledgement of their treatment during Daniel's recovery and commitment to treating both Daniel and me as valued family members rather than potential sources of image problems. The letter also established clear boundaries around the conditions under which I would participate in family events, including the expectation that Daniel would be included and welcomed at all gatherings, that our own life challenges and circumstances would be treated with respect rather than seen as inconveniences, and that family relationships would be based on genuine care rather than social performance and networking opportunities. I never received a response to my letter, which told me everything I needed to know about Marcus and Jennifer's priorities and their willingness to change their approach to family relationships. Their silence confirmed that they remained more interested in conditional inclusion on their terms than in building genuinely healthy relationships that could weather difficulties and disagreements. The lack of response also freed me from any remaining guilt about maintaining boundaries that protected my well-being and my relationship with Daniel. A year after Marcus and Jennifer's wedding, Daniel and I celebrated our own engagement with a small party in our backyard, surrounded by the friends and chosen family members who had supported us through our greatest challenges and continued to show up for our everyday joys and struggles. The contrast between our celebration and the elaborate, exclusionary wedding we'd been uninvited from felt symbolic of the different values and priorities that shaped our respective approaches to relationships and community. Our engagement party was casual and authentic, with potluck food, string lights Daniel had hung in our fruit trees, and conversations that ranged from serious discussions about life goals to ridiculous debates about pizza toppings and movie preferences. Sarah gave a toast about the importance of choosing people who show up consistently rather than just during convenient times. Daniel's parents shared stories about building lasting relationships through ordinary kindness and daily commitment rather than grand gestures and perfect moments. The guest list included our neighbors, work colleagues, college friends, and the chosen family we'd assembled over years of shared experiences and mutual support. Every person present had demonstrated their commitment to our relationship and well-being through actions rather than words, creating a celebration that felt grounded in genuine community rather than social obligation or family hierarchy. Looking around our backyard that evening, watching people who genuinely cared about each other enjoying simple pleasures and authentic connection, I felt grateful for the painful lessons that had taught me to recognize the difference between real family and family performance. The crisis that had revealed my birth family's conditional loyalty had also strengthened my appreciation for the people who had chosen to remain present and supportive when life became difficult and complicated. Daniel's recovery had progressed better than doctors had initially predicted, with his physical therapy regimen evolving into a fitness routine that left him stronger and more active than he'd been before the accident. The experience of navigating medical challenges, insurance complications, and emotional trauma together had deepened our relationship and clarified our shared values around mutual support and authentic communication. We'd learned that we could depend on each other during genuine emergencies, and that knowledge had made our commitment feel more solid and realistic. The financial challenges created by Daniel's medical expenses and my reduced work schedule during his recovery had also taught us valuable lessons about problem solving together and making sacrifices that felt fair and sustainable. We discovered that we shared similar attitudes about money, priorities, and long-term planning, and that we could make difficult decisions together without resentment or power struggles. The experience had prepared us for marriage in ways that ordinary circumstances never could have. As I think back on everything that happened during those months of family crisis and relationship evaluation, I realized that being uninvited from my nephew's baptism was actually a gift that forced me to examine family dynamics I'd been accepting and tolerating for years without recognizing their harmful effects on my self-worth and relationship choices. The painful experience of being abandoned by my birth family during a genuine emergency had created space for me to appreciate and invest more deeply in the chosen family that had consistently shown up with genuine love and support. The lessons I learned during that period have shaped every relationship decision I've made since, helping me recognize red flags earlier and establish boundaries that protect both my own well-being and my ability to show up authentically for people I care about. I've become much better at distinguishing between people who care about me as a person and people who see me as useful for their own purposes, and that skill has improved every area of my life, from work relationships to friendships to extended family interactions. If you're dealing with family members who treat your crises as inconveniences and your needs as unreasonable demands, I want you to know that you're not being too sensitive or expecting too much from people who claim to love you. Real family, whether biological or chosen, shows up consistently during both celebrations and emergencies. Real family doesn't make their support conditional on your ability to maintain their image or avoid creating complications for their social plans. The people who truly belong in your life will demonstrate their commitment through actions during difficult times, not just words during convenient moments. They'll defend your relationship when others criticize it, include your partner in family events and decisions, and offer practical support when you're facing genuine challenges. They'll celebrate your successes without undermining them, and they'll provide comfort during failures without making them about their own embarrassment or inconvenience. If you're currently being pressured to accept treatment that feels wrong in order to maintain family relationships, consider whether those relationships are actually providing you with the love, security, and support that healthy families are supposed to offer. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop trying to earn acceptance from people who have made it clear that their love comes with conditions you can't consistently meet. Building chosen family takes time and intentional effort, but the relationships you create based on mutual respect and genuine care will sustain you through challenges in ways that obligatory relationships built on guilt and social expectation never can. The energy you're currently spending trying to manage other people's emotions and meet their unreasonable expectations can be redirected toward building connections with people who actually want to know and support the real version of you. I'm not suggesting that you should immediately cut contact with every difficult family member or abandon relationships that have provided some positive experiences along with harmful patterns. But I am encouraging you to trust your instincts about treatment that feels wrong and to prioritize your own well-being over family harmony that requires you to accept unacceptable behavior. The baptism I was uninvited from happened without me, and I'm sure it was exactly the perfect image-managed celebration Jennifer had envisioned. But the relationship I was uninvited from building with my nephew will someday be his loss as much as mine, because he'll grow up learning that family love is conditional and that supporting each other during difficult times is optional rather than fundamental. Meanwhile, Daniel and I are building a life and eventual family based on the values we learned from our chosen community, showing up consistently, supporting each other through both ordinary challenges and major crises, including everyone who demonstrates genuine commitment to mutual care, and creating celebrations that reflect authentic joy rather than social performance. If you've been uninvited from family events because your authentic life doesn't fit someone else's perfect image, consider using that exclusion as an opportunity to evaluate whether those relationships are actually serving your highest good. Sometimes being uninvited is the invitation you needed to build something better elsewhere. Let me know in the comments if you've experienced similar family dynamics, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about choosing yourself over family dysfunction. You deserve relationships that celebrate who you are, not who you're willing to pretend to be.